Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of He Who Has Ears. The last time we discussed on the topic sin, I believe that we were not able to exhaust everything as we ought to. So I'm going to continue on the topic. The last time we had the discussion, I started with a story about the frog and the scorpion, and how, due to the nature of the scorpion, got the frog and himself killed, because his nature showed up. And despite the fact that he knew the fact that they were going to die, his nature basically had the better of him. We've also talked about the black widow. We talked about the premantis. These are insects that basically decapitate or kill their spouses while having sexual intercourse. They know that it's going to happen anyway, but yet still they get themselves involved in this. And but they, because of the nature of these creatures. To basically summarize the whole thing, no matter how much you tame a bear or how much you tame a lion, it will always, return back to its default mode, which is to eat raw meat, or to basically be aggressive or be wild. So no matter how much you tame them, the wild tendency is always there, and they would always return to their nature. So, and I basically said that this nature, is related to the sin nature of man, which came into existence purely as a consequence of the sin Adam and Eve committed by eating from the tree of good and evil. The most important thing to note is that the eating from the tree of good and evil, did not bring about sin. No. But the consequence of eating of that tree is what brought about sin. And this is purely how. Because the consequence is death, they died physically and they died spiritually. So what is sin nature? Sin nature is the inherent human tendency, right, to rebel against God. Let me repeat that. Sin nature is the inherent human tendency to rebel against God. The consequence of Adam and Eve's sin. This invoked, the sin nature of man, which is in existence now. So sin nature is here to stay, and sin nature is in all of us from generations to generation, even up until now. So the conclusion of this is that man by nature is evil. That is, the core of man's heart is evil, although in the beginning it was not so. The Bible verse that basically to explain this, is Jeremiah 18, 1-4. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down to the potter's house, and there I'll give you a message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheels. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred by his hand. So the potter formed into another pot, shaping it as it seems best to him. The potter was molding a pot. And because during the process of molding the pot, the clay became marred. And I basically, although this whole scenario, Jeremiah, God was trying to show Jeremiah, and warn the people of Israel of the sins which they've committed, and it was basically telling them that, look, if they don't basically try and return to God, or they don't, that they would basically fall into the hands of their enemies. That was the story, but I'm relating it to this situation now, because when the clay was mad, what mars the clay? God make everything God makes is perfect. What made the clay? What made the clay mad? You understand? So God made human beings perfect, but it was due to the sin that corrupted man and basically mad it. So basically, in terms of that, Jeremiah 18, 1-4 says, the B part is, so the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. So basically, man has been mad, so God had to temporarily remold us into a situation whereby, because he loves us, he doesn't want to condemn us, so he molded us into as a situation that could best suit that situation, or as best as he could at that point in time. That is what I'm trying to get from there, and that is how I'm actually trying to use it to explain where we're going from here. So I did say that man by nature right now, based on his fallen nature, right, is evil, and because of his evil nature, it is hard for him to basically do anything that is right. You understand? Yes, we do have free nature, free moral nature, right? But the moral nature that we have it's already biased, tilted towards evil. So because man is evil by nature, it's looking as if it's almost impossible for man to do what is right. I'm not saying this because I just want to say it. I'm going to basically use biblical Bible verses, and that is what I want to basically accomplish today. I'm going to use the Bible to try and basically justify what I'm trying to say. And the first one I'm going to look at is the book of Job. The book of Job is one of the earliest books that, there's the stories in the Bible. It predates the book of Genesis. And I'm going to start from this phrase, Job 1:8. I said, then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. If you go before, read slightly before, it was God that saw Satan going, and he basically had to call the attention of Satan. Come, have you noticed my servant Job? You understand? And then he now used that verse 8 to describe him. That he is the finest in all the earth. He is blameless. He has complete integrity, and he fears God and stays away from evil. But if we continue to read, when calamity came upon Job, Job's true nature came, but God had already said those things about him. Can God lie? He basically caused his existence. You understand? The fact that he's a creature of God and everything, if you cause your existence, then basically you're trying to basically say that your maker did not do did not really do a good job, or created you at the wrong time, or basically trying to put the blame on your creator. Because in Job's 1:3, the first thing Job did after that calamity was cursed the day that he was born. If you further read, He accused God of being, unjust. That God basically did a great injustice. And this is someone that has the fear of God. In Job's 9:22 to 24, he said, "It is all one. Therefore I say, he destroys both the blameless and the wicked." That is what he's saying God does. So he destroys both the blameless and the wicked. When disaster brings sudden death, he mocks at the calamity of the innocent. He's saying that about, God. In Job 10:3, it says, "Does it seem good to you to oppress, to despise the work of your hand?" That is what he's telling God. So in other words, all these things that he's saying is contrary to what basically God said about him. Did I tell you that Job had pride? Yes. In his what's it called? In some of the things he said, he had pride. In Job's 13:18 said, "Behold, I have prepared my case. I know that I shall be in the right." How can you sit down with your Creator and tell him that you have prepared your case and you know that you'll be in the right? Job 33 verse 9. Elihu was quoting Job, in that verse. He's saying, "You say, I am pure without transgression. I am clean and there is no guilt in me." So what is that? Isn't that a tint of pride? So Job was indeed very proud. He knows because God has told him. So that thing had basically, sank in his head. So it is right there, but it is subconscious, but he didn't know. So he was basically confrontational with his maker. In Job 13:22, it says, "Then call and I will answer." Can you even tell your earthly father that? You understand? Daring him. So Job said, "Call and I will answer. Or let me speak and you reply me." In Job 22:3-4, it says, "Oh, that I know where I might find him. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments." I really don't need to say more. But I'm going to go back to read Job 1:8. What God did say about Job. Said, "Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil." Would you say that statement is true? If you're saying that statement is not true, then what are you saying? Can God lie? Before I answer that question, let me go back to some earlier situation to prove that man by nature is evil. If you look at Genesis 4, 6-7, it says, "Why are you so angry?" The Lord asked Cain. "Why do you look so dejected?" Verse 7 says, "You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master." That was a warning from God to Cain. And why did that warning come? Because God could see his heart. And why was Cain tilting towards evil in the first place? Because the repercussion or the consequence of what Adam and Eve did is on him. He is an offspring. So By nature, the tendency for evil to come in was there. It says evil is crouching, at the door, waiting or eager to control you. Then if you also look at Genesis 6 verses 5 and 6, it says the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. He saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on this earth, and that every inclination of the thought of the human heart was only evil all the time. So that is the consequence of the sin nature of man. What about the consequences of what Adam and Eve did? The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. This is just a few generations after the creation of Adam and Eve. And man, God just confirmed the nature of man. And because of that, there was a great flood, which we know. And because of the great flood, God chose Noah. God saw that, okay, Noah is, he's obedient, he's good, he can listen to me and everything. And God chose him, and then told him, gave him instructions to build an ark. And Job basically built an ark while everybody was just having fun, and because at that point in time it had never rained, so they were basically laughing at him. But Job was so obedient, and that he followed the instruction of the Lord, and he built an ark, and the Lord did indeed destroy the world. But what happened immediately came out of the ark? He got drunk. And this is a man that the Lord had basically spoken about. Oh, he's good, he's that, he's obedient. And yet still, the first thing he did was to get drunk. And that was what led to the curse of one of his sons, because they saw his nakedness. Can we look at the man called Moses? This one, basically, I remembered when God was defending Moses against the sister and Aaron, Miriam and Aaron, and then when they were said, we too, we see God with it, what did God say? He said, look, I talked to Moses face to face. In fact, let me read what I wrote here. God referred to Moses as a friend who he speaks to face. Everything Moses asked for, or everything that Moses said, was law. You understand? With God, unilaterally, they defeated the greatest army in the world. He was duly respected, and everybody respected him. God made it known that Moses was his friend, all throughout this time. But yet still, when it was towards the end of his life, God did not let him go into the promised land. Why? Because Moses sinned. Moses had a temper. Moses basically, because God said, look, speak to the rock. He hit the rock with his rod twice. You understand? And then Moses now said, must I always? Who did he put ahead before God? He himself. Must I always bring water, or must we always bring water out of this rock for you? What does that signify? You understand? Pride. So, God, but yet God still chose him. His, man's sin nature would always be in man. It's going nowhere. But yet, God basically said something utterly different about them. Does that mean that God is lying, or is just trying to protect them, or what? David, we're going to talk about David. This is the man after God's own heart. You understand? They said, Saul I hate, David I love. Even before, he was made king, or he had the interaction, through Samuel to become God's representative, or the king of God's people, and God was so pleased with him. It was someone after God's heart, but yet still he committed adultery, by sleeping with Bathsheba. He tried to use lies to cover it. Then eventually it led to murder, because he basically murdered Uriah. He gave the instructions, take him to where the battle is fiercest and send him ahead, so that, he would lose his wife. Well, in fact, it was not murder, it was premeditated, it was planned. And then at the end of it all, he now married Uriah's wife, while he had so many concubines. Nathan was very, he basically, why he was wise when he basically, told David to judge such scenario. And David realized that, he had done what was evil in the sight of God. And yet this is the man that is supposed to be, that is after God's own heart. You understand? So what is the essence of all those stories? It is extremely simple. Man by nature is evil. You understand? When I said that, I was not conjuring, I was not formulating, I was not procrastinating. Everything I got from the Bible verse, and I've read some, not all, to prove this to you. Although some of you might say, oh, everything I've read is in the Old Testament, but don't worry. I'm not going to treat all that in today's topic. No, I'm going to treat it as it goes on. I'm going to gradually and surely unfold where I am going to. But the fact is that one thing is for sure, right? God chooses people, and God chooses to make people righteous. In Isaiah 43, verse 25, says, I, even I, am he who blots out your transgression for my own sake, and I remember your sin no more. That is God. And that, to be honest, all the people that I've read, all the people that I've mentioned, that is how God basically deals with them. It's not because they are sinless or because they've committed no sin. God chose to blot out their sin. Some people will be like, okay, in all these things that I've said, where is the place of free will? I thought God gave us free will. You understand? From this thing, we are condemned already. There is no hope for us already. So why should we even try? Shouldn't we resent ourselves to faith if we're all going to be condemned in the first place? I mean, if we are so much dead. Remember Ephesians 2:1 that I read in the last program? It says, once you were dead because of your disobedience and your sins. Now, realize that it said once you were dead. So that is a sign that there is hope. But I'm not going to basically rush it now. But it's just to prove a point that at that point in time, we were physically dying because our cells were, and then as we were spiritually dead. Our connection to God had been severed, and we were tainted in sin, and sin nature became our nature, and that basically made us evil.